Parents have the right. Parents have the power to choose the school that's best for their child. I'm Virginia Walden Ford, and I've spent my life fighting for parents to make that choice.
This fight won't be over until every child is in a school that they deserve and that meets their needs. Every child. Put children first.
But relics of 19th century bigotry were trying to take that choice away from us. Parents were treated as pipes to a school based on a zip code. And it took the courage of one single mom from Montana to take the fight from the big sky of Montana to the steps of the highest court in the land. This is any parent's story. This is every parent's story. Parents no longer have to take it. The highest court in the land stands with parents. And what about those discriminatory relics of 19th century bigotry?
Those are now gone.
The monument to bigotry is torn down.
Blaine amendments on this historic day are done.
The path to educational opportunity is wide open.
I, as a parent, have a God-given right to direct my children's education. And I feel that that's every parent's right and responsibility to make that choice.
So now is the time to put kids first. The time to let our kids learn. The time to take what's rightfully ours. The time for parents to choose. What choice will you make?
Somebody has to stand up and take this torch and keep it going.
So if we don't take action now, there's no one to blame. This is the Big Sky Promise.
Education is a people issue, and it really doesn't matter who's in the White House or who's in the State House or the courthouse or City Hall. It doesn't matter who controls all those houses. It matters who controls our house. Parents have got to be in control of their own homes and their own children. And then parents make those decisions. And then all these other houses respond and respect what parents want for their children.
To me, school choice means that I, as a parent, have a God-given right to raise my children and a responsibility to raise my children well. And I feel that that's every parent's right and responsibility to make that choice. My name is Kendra Espinoza, and I am a single mom with two girls, Naomi and Sarah. They go to school at Stillwater Christian School here in Kalispell, Montana. Initially, we were living about 30 miles out of town, and I was a homeschool mom and really enjoying the life, but things were not going well, and the girls' dad left, decided that this wasn't a good fit for him anymore, and so he walked out and left us, and so we went through a period of time where we really just had to really struggle. I sold all the animals and tried to get back on our feet, and so public school kind of seemed like my only option, because now I was having to work full-time, and I didn't have that choice, but I had to go and work outside of the home.
Kendra was sitting there with two kids, no money, no job. Her house was going to foreclosure. She immediately sprang into action. She moved them into town. She put the kids into public school, and things were going okay, but the kids were not doing that well in the public schools.
They were not thriving. Naomi has always been very vocal in sharing her faith with her friends at school, and because of that, she tended to get ostracized and maybe picked on a little bit and teased by some of the parents just for the fact that she likes to share her faith. For me, it bothered me to hear that there were parents that were willing to say that in front of other kids. Sarah was not thriving at the public school. She tends to need more of a values-based education. She gets distracted a little bit more easily. That's just her personality, but she just needs a little bit more one-on-one time. So those were things that concerned me, and so I really wanted that environment to change a little bit. I felt like I had kind of thrown them to the wolves, and here they were out in this setting that I wanted more for them. So I started looking at other options and found Stillwater Christian School.
Stillwater's vision is really our why, and that is to develop lifelong learners who discern and apply God's truth as they serve and lead wherever God calls. But they're also getting a well-rounded education. It's really preparing them for this 21st century world that we live in. It's an excellent academic program, excellent college preparatory program. God calls parents in Ephesians chapter 4 to raise up their kids in the teaching and discipline and instruction of the Lord. It's a parental responsibility.
My name is Jerry Anderson. My daughter Emma attends Stillwater Christian School in Kalispell, Montana. Emma and I became a family in 2008. We were joined together as a family at the Department of Adoption Affairs in Nanchang, China. From that moment, it's been an incredible journey with her. When we got home, she was a little sponge. So early on, I knew I needed to find an environment that was going to foster that need to be challenged. I chose Stillwater Christian because of the Christian values. I chose it because of their history with academics. It's a decision I've never regretted.
Two single moms, two different stories in Montana, one choice. No matter what you call it, the fundamental principle is the same.
It comes down to one word. It's freedom. The fundamental freedom that parents would have to choose the best education for their particular child.
School choice really is important. I get to direct where my kids are taught and what they're taught and what they hear and what they see, but I think that's important for all parents to have that right.
Well, number one, I'm the parent. And so I know what's best for my child. I'm a product of public education. I went kindergarten through 12th grade here in Kalispell. But I just know it isn't an environment that would work for Emma. She needs to be in a smaller environment. From the beginning, I chose Stillwater because I knew it was the best place for Emma. I don't see her being lost on campus as just a number. She's a student with a name. It was a no-brainer with Stillwater. I'll do what I have to keep her there.
And the stories from the Espinoza and Anderson families represent dilemmas that millions of families face every day.
You know, we have the benefit of more than 30 years of history now with a variety of educational choice programs across the country. And all the data points to positive outcomes for students, no matter how you slice the studies. They're small, they're regional, they're state, they're national. When students and parents have options, they do better.
Our education systems are sort of a one-stop shop, one size fits all. And not every child learns the same way. Being able to provide those options is important. Public education is about educating the public's children. We just need to find out the best ways to do that.
I really think a one-size-fits-all approach that says kids have to have this and everything else is inferior is really misguided because it takes parents out of the mix.
We have school choice in this country, so long as you can afford tuition at a private school or afford to live in the right zip code that has high-performing public schools. If you don't have those resources, though, you're stuck in the public school the local government has assigned your child to. Education shouldn't work that way.
Because the goal of education is to help students achieve prosperity. And the way to do that is great education. And if we can't give our kids great education wherever it is, then we are failing them, as the data continues to show.
The United States public school system is a $700 billion industry, but globally, American students are falling behind, especially in math, science, and reading. The U.S. spends about $13,000 per student in the public school system, which is one of the highest in the world. But it's nearly a 50-50 split between instructional spending and operational costs for that student.
The biggest expenditure of any state happens in a socialist type funding model. If we continued to fund public schools and public education in that manner, that over time the result would be mediocrity.
The problem is that money isn't technically attached to the student, but instead feeds the $700 billion beast known as the public school system.
The money they pay in taxes should follow the child, not a building, not a teachers union, but the child. Only school choice puts all the incentives in a way that you get quality education and parental control.
We don't have money following students unless there are choices. And so we're not even spending money based on the students' needs. We're spending money on a system. At the end of the day, after literally billions of dollars have been spent to create this system, the last thing we think about is education. Until money follows the student to the school, we will have inequity. Money will be wasted, and we will not have the success that we need. So money plus choice equals great outcomes.
We interviewed a number of parents around the country that were either in choice programs or in choice schools. And one parent said it best. She said, when you give us a choice, you give our kids a chance. And to me, that's really the bottom line.
Human flourishing is part of human dignity. It's part of what we believe as Americans, right? The pursuit of happiness.
How our kids are educated is part of that pursuit of happiness. If my children don't have that opportunity, and other parents' children don't have that opportunity to educate their children well in an environment that works best for that child, how can they grow up to reach their full potential? As citizens of this country, we have that right.
People who support the public schools have always tried to kill private education, and the Supreme Court rejected that in a case from 1925. Pierce versus Society of Sisters, that said the child is not the mere creature of the state, and that parents have the right and the responsibility to direct the education of their children.
The argument of the other side is that school choice is going to take the cream off the top and leave the public schools with those students that have more challenges. In reality, it's absolutely just the opposite. Parents with struggling kids take advantage of school choice and pull their kids out of public schools and look for other options so that their kids don't drop out. We call school choice a private sector solution to a public sector problem, and that problem is the dropout rate.
1.2 million students drop out of high school every year, or one student every 26 seconds. For every student that drops out, there's a cost to that individual and to society of about $1.1 million over that student's lifetime. The school dropout rate is literally a $1 trillion problem. Low-income and minority families also face another challenge on top of the dropout rate.
So these kids are living in a universe where only 2 out of every 10 of their classmates can read on grade level, can do math on grade level. And the fact that we're not giving them the foundation more privileged kids in other communities are getting is a real disservice and a real discredit to our country.
It is actually pretty inconceivable that we could have so many, particularly low-income and minority parents, who are told where to go to school based on their zip code.
The problem that school choice is supposed to solve is middle and low-income families who the public schools, for whatever reason, are not working for them, and just give them another chance.
But the reality is, for many Americans, they simply can't afford to make that decision. And so for many parents, their only option is to attend the school that they are assigned to attend by their zip code. And the students are simply trapped.
The other reason we should eschew and push back on, again, a 150-year-old school system is it's not working. And one of the arguments that we have made repeatedly is there is a direct correlation between how well students learn and having a choice.
Our kids, they will spend from kindergarten to 12th grade between 12 and 15,000 hours at that school, which is really more waking hours than they will spend in our homes. As a choice, I believe it's one of the most important decisions a parent can make.
One of the things that I like about Stillwater the most is the family atmosphere, because you mean something to the teachers. You're not just one of the numbers, that they actually care about you.
It's so much like a family. It's a warm community filled with really good people.
There was an event that Stillwater Christian School had with Mike Huckabee. He had come to town and he was doing a big presentation, and it was a very big gala event that the school puts on every year. Watching the maturity of these older students there coming from Stillwater, it really struck something in me, and I thought, that's what I want for my kids. That's how I want them to grow up. I want them to have that for an example. I want them to be challenged. I want them to grow up to be upstanding, responsible, contributing citizens. And so then I went to the school and they had one of their snapshot presentations.
As she tells it, she was in tears while she was taking the tour because all the kids in the school were happy. It was this big family. It was really the community that she wanted for her kids.
I went there and I remember thinking, I can't afford this. There's no way that I could ever send my kids here. Why am I here? Why am I even going through this presentation? But as I sat there, I just felt this stillness in me that said, walk this direction. Just keep going on this path. I made that decision there at that point at the school, thinking, okay, this is where I'm going to put the kids. But now the next step is, how am I going to do it? How am I going to afford to make that happen?
She works her ass off for her kids to send them to the school of her choice.
So we had a big yard sale and I took donations from people all over and just put out signs and asked people to contribute to this yard sale. And so they donated stuff and we sold it. And Naomi was out mowing lawns for the neighbors and trying to sell stuff just to make enough money to make it happen. And every year thereafter, I can't just rely on one job. So I've had to work multiple jobs. So whether that be commercial janitorial or bookkeeping from home, making things and selling them. I like to build out of wood. So any of those things that we have done, all of that contributes to our tuition fund. So there's no way that even with our 3 jobs that we are working, there's no way that I'd be able to do this without assistance on top of that.
Over 50% of our families are beneficiaries of our variable tuition program. The fact that more than half of our families are on that program, I think, really speaks to the value we place on being an option for families that don't have the means to pay the full price of our advertised tuition.
Kendra Espinoza also found ACE Scholarships, who specializes in assisting low-income families get to the school of their choice by harnessing what's going on in the charitable community and supercharging those donations to put those families over the hump.
We want to make sure that when these guys are making choices for their children, that they have all the available options on the table, and that's public, charter, private, virtual, everything else. So if we can step in and provide tuition assistance that opens the gates to a private school that might otherwise be out of reach, that's our mission and that's what we do.
My girls are doing so well at Stillwater Christian School. I love seeing them growing up to be responsible young adults. They're challenged academically, which makes me very happy. They're thriving, they're doing very, very well, and they're happy, they're enjoying it.
ACE Scholarship recipients in Montana had a 100% high school graduation rate in 2017 and 2018, nearly a quarter higher than the graduation rate of low-income students in the state of Montana. Shortly after Naomi and Sarah began school at Stillwater, another scholarship opportunity arose in Big Sky Country.
The state of Montana passed a scholarship tax credit program. The way that the program was designed to work is that it would incentivize private donations from individuals and corporations to private scholarship granting organizations by giving those donors a $150 tax credit. Private individuals or private corporations write checks from their private bank accounts to the private scholarship organizations, which would then bundle those donations and give them to families to attend the private school of the family's choice. And so nowhere along the line were there state dollars involved or state actors involved in all of those decisions.
The Big Sky Scholarship Program emerged out of this, and it awarded about 40 families $500 scholarships, including the Espinoza and Anderson families. Programs like this don't fund the entire cost of private education, but $500 proved to be a godsend for Kendra Espinoza.
We've done well, we've worked hard for what we have, but $500 makes a huge difference. $500 over the course of a year means a lot for us. It seems like a little bit to some people, it's a big deal to us.
Because that's $500 they don't have to make working as a janitor as a third job.
This is not the land of the rich and famous that they're coming from. These are just hard-working moms here in Montana. They're struggling to make ends meet, but they want the very best for their children. You don't want to cross them.
One of the many myths about parental choice programs is that they drain money from the public school. The state spent more than $14,000 per student at Montana public schools in 2019. The state tax credit going back to the private individual who donated to the Montana School Choice Program, $150, 100 times less than the amount it costs the state to educate a child. In 2015, Montana became the 18th state to enact a tax credit scholarship program, yet it was still challenged almost immediately.
The Montana Department of Revenue looked at the program, took a look at the Montana State Constitution, and so they passed a rule, Rule 1.
The Department of Revenue rule says a new $150 tax credit to help private school students cannot be used to help kids attending religious schools.
For the government to step in and say, you're not counted in this, you don't get to participate in this because your kids go to a religious school, to me that was discriminatory. If this scholarship program is completely taken apart and we no longer have that as an option, we can't stay at Stillwater School.
Since the Institute for Justice opened its doors in 1991, there hasn't been a single day that we haven't been in court defending parents' right to choose the best school for their children. Really, it boils down to it just being one of the fundamental liberties of being an American citizen, the right of parents to choose what school is going to best work for their child.
Well, we found out that this was going to be a problem, that this rule was going to be passed, that families were going to be excluded from the program. We went around looking for families who would be affected, and we were referred to a number of families, including Kendra Espinoza.
We finally had somebody in our corner that understood our situation, that appreciated the work that that I was willing to do and that my kids were willing to do, and was willing to stand in our corner and fight for us.
I met with the Institute for Justice and wanted to know if I would be interested in being part of this case. Morning of the decision, Emma, she says, "Mama, what have you decided?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of waffling." And she says, "Well, Mama, if we don't do it, who will?"
Kendra Espinoza, Jerry Anderson, and Jamie Schaefer filed a lawsuit Wednesday in Flathead County. That lawsuit leaves the Department of Justice to defend the rule that the state Solicitor General previously called indefensible.
We should never back down. I think that we have to stand our ground and fight for what we know is right. Because if we don't stand up and we don't fight, we're going to lose all of our rights and all of our freedoms.
There's nothing more powerful than a motivated parent who wants what's best for his or her children.
I think a lot of people think of parental choice and they think of a mom and a dad and 6 kids and a white picket fence, and it really isn't that. This is one person against a big government program trying to take care of her children.
I may not know much about appropriations or the ins and outs of tax credits or any of the other legal mumbo jumbo, but I do know that in our country we have a right and a responsibility to speak up when freedoms are violated and when liberty is at stake.
Well, we have a saying here in Montana about moms like Kendra Espinoza and Jerry Anderson. They're mama grizzly bears. They're protected, they're cubs, and they'll go to the mat to fight on behalf of their children.
The stage was set for the next monumental school choice case, known as Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue, with the Institute for Justice defending the Montana moms. The Espinoza case certainly wasn't the first legal obstacle in the way of school choice for the Institute for Justice.
The first case arose out of a program that was passed in Ohio that served students in the city of Cleveland who were trapped in low-performing public schools. And they were provided a voucher, a state-funded scholarship, to choose a private school or a neighboring public school.
The vouchers deal with direct state appropriations, which means that legislators sit down and they actually pull money from the state budget for this purpose, and they're sending out checks usually to parents who then direct it to a school, right? So it's direct state money from state coffers.
And that was the Zellman case.
That was a question of whether school vouchers violate the Establishment Clause. And that's whether, say, if you give vouchers to a child to attend a religious school, is that government funding religion? Is that establishing a state religion?
And the court said in a 5-4 decision that allowing families to choose religious schools in an otherwise religiously neutral school choice program was perfectly constitutional.
And so long as the program operates on private choice of parents, meaning that parents rather than government make the choice of which school their particular children will attend, these programs are perfectly permissible under the federal Constitution.
Parents are the conduit for money, that the state is not in fact paying for religion. So Zellman codified that parents in fact can drive the education of their child, that they can spend the money allocated for their child's education at any school as long as the state gave you that authority.
And that really opened up the door to a lot more of these programs. And they've been overall very, very successful. And parents typically have over a 90% satisfaction rate with these programs. Kids who are doing well in the public schools stay in the public schools. They have no reason to leave. It's the kids who are struggling, who have special needs, who are being bullied, who don't feel safe, who are afraid to go to school every day or don't want to go to school every day. Those are the kids that are really benefiting from these scholarships.
In addition to school vouchers, another way of funding school choice programs was beginning to take shape, which ultimately became the heart of the Espinoza case, tax credit scholarships.
The way that works is that individuals or corporations are able to donate to a fund that gives scholarships to children to attend private schools. Then when they filed their taxes, they're able to get a credit for that donation that they made.
You choose whether or not you want to give money to someone to take to a school. That maximizes freedom and choice both for the families and for the funders.
Arizona adopted its tax credit scholarship program in 1997, and it was challenged immediately. The court in Arizona Christian School Tuition Organization v. Wynn ultimately said that the plaintiffs who brought the case never had legal standing because tax credit programs are funded not with public dollars, but with private ones.
In the midst of that legal battle for tax credit scholarships in Arizona, a school choice movement was brewing in Big Sky country.
So 2008 is really when the narrative changed. I went to a national symposium and there were some of the top school choice people in the nation there. And I approached one of them and said, I'd like to bring a school choice effort, a serious school choice effort to Montana. And I almost got laughed out of the room, but I was persistent. And finally they said, okay, if you can put together a meeting and show us that you've got enough interested parties, enough buy-in, then we'll consider working with you.
That meeting took place in Bozeman, Montana in November of 2008. Leslie Heiner presented at that meeting about tax credit scholarships, commenting on the success of the event, saying, "In my estimation, the symposium will prove to have been a catalyst for real change."
People in Montana who had the foresight, who had the guts to think big. They had the guts to think as big as their sky. It was at that point that I knew, okay, Montana has something really good going on here.
When we came in, we quickly realized that the real crux of the issue was not free market capitalism. The crux of the issue was kids. And we had a problem in Montana. We had 2,000 kids a year dropping out of Montana schools. We need options, as many options as possible, so kids that are in danger of dropping out can find their perfect educational fit. And when we did that, it took off as a movement.
But with school choice, you always have to, get through the legal barrier, but more importantly, you have to get through the political barriers.
With the school choice political barrier broken in Montana, Kendra Espinoza and the Institute for Justice were just beginning their battle to break the legal barrier to parental choice.
The Department of Revenue, who was the government agency who was in charge of administering the program, came in and enacted a rule that said scholarships could not be used at religious schools. So we heard about this and we sued.
As soon as the Montana Department of Revenue went forward with this rule, we had 2 district court decisions in Montana, both in our favor, so we felt like we were doing well. We knew the problem would be the Montana Supreme Court.
This court is now in session.
The argument had gone very well. All of us who were there were pretty sure we had won. We had never lost on the basis that this is public funds. Well,
a major ruling today from the Montana Supreme Court when the court strikes down a controversial tax credit that indirectly helps private schools in Montana.
I was very disappointed in the state of Montana. I was very disappointed.
I was shocked. I actually wasn't expecting that. I was anticipating a ruling in our favor because to me it just seems like this is a no-brainer. To me it just seemed like it's obvious that it's discriminatory.
Now the High Court said the $150 tax credit passed in 2015 is unconstitutional because it amounts to aid for religiously affiliated schools.
And they issue their decision saying it's public money and it's aid to the schools, both of which are wrong on the Montana Constitution.
And not only did they say that you had to exclude religious schools from the program in order to comply with a provision in the Montana Constitution, but they then invalidated the entire program because they said that was the only way to ensure that not a single dime of money went to a family going to a religious school. It's a shameful argument. The only reason the program was invalidated was because it included religious schools.
Just so you know, they totally blew it.
A group that fought to preserve that tax credit says it plans to appeal the decision to the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Institute for Justice filed a cert petition appealing the Espinoza case to the United States Supreme Court. For the 2019-2020 term, the Supreme Court agreed to hear 73 cases out of about 7,000 appeals. Only 1% of appeal cases get the chance to be argued in front of the highest court in the land.
Well, the state of Montana decided in 2015 that students attending private religious schools cannot benefit from a new state tax credit. Now, the state will defend that decision before the U.S. Supreme Court. The nation's high court announced today it will take this case.
That was a moment of hope. Initially, when I started with this case, I had no way of knowing where we'd be 4 years later. I simply wanted to make a difference for the community around us. If I had known that I'd be petitioning the highest court in the land, or that this case would potentially impact so many families across America, I might have been too afraid of the responsibility and maybe not have pushed through. But I do know that in our country, we have a right and a responsibility to speak up when freedoms are violated and when liberty is at stake.
Emma's words echo in the back of my head. If we don't do it, Mama, who will? This is big sky country. So let's have it go big.
Dick Comer retired in May 2018, but came out of retirement to argue the Espinoza case at the United States Supreme Court. This would be the 3rd Supreme Court case related to school choice for the Institute for Justice. The date for the historic Espinoza argument was set for January 22nd, 2020.
Parents should have a choice where their children go to school, and they should have that choice regardless of how much money they make. That's what school choice is about, and that's what this case is about, and we're gonna win it.
The legal battle was raging, but Kendra, Jerry, and the Institute for Justice were fighting discrimination more than 150 years old. Discrimination still found in 37 states. Discrimination that remains the biggest legal barrier to school choice.
The Montana Department of Revenue enacted a rule excluding religious options from the program. They claimed that this rule was required by a provision in the Montana Constitution known as a Blaine Amendment.
The Blaine Amendment.
Blaine Amendment.
Blaine Amendments are a relic of 19th century anti-Catholic bigotry.
Blaine Amendments are interesting little things that won't go away.
The United States, the most free nation in the world, harbors a 19th century discriminatory practice called the Blaine Amendment that prohibits people from making a determination.
As I see it, the Blaine Amendment is a sad, unfortunate, and almost humorous blip in history.
There's a direct correlation between the origin of the Blaine Amendment and the creation of the public school system.
A guy named Horace Mann is considered the father of the American public schools. His battle was with the religious private schools, which were denominational. In the 1830s, the idea of a secular education is sort of an oxymoron at the time that the public schools are started. And so what Horace Mann was trying to do was to create non-denominational public schools.
But those common schools were predominantly Protestant in orientation. They were not the thoroughly secular public schools that we are familiar with today.
The schools were Protestant, kids read from the Protestant Bible, they recited Protestant prayers, they sang Protestant hymns, and they bashed Catholics a lot.
As Catholic immigration increased to this country, this became a problem because you had newly arrived Catholic families whose children were compelled to attend public schools that were essentially Protestant schools.
Their argument was simple. If the Protestants have a publicly funded school system, we should also receive a share of the school funds so that we can have a Catholic school system.
You can imagine how that went over with the Protestant majority at the time. There was a virulent anti-Catholic backlash, and that really metastasized after the Civil War. In 1875, a well-publicized speech by President Grant talked about the supposed threat of Catholics to the public school system.
President Grant called for an amendment to the U.S. Constitution to prevent funding for sectarian schools, and it was an open secret, and the U.S. Supreme Court has acknowledged that it was an open secret, that sectarian was code for Catholic.
A gentleman named James G. Blaine took up the president's charge.
James G. Blaine.
James Blaine.
James Blaine, Blaine for Maine.
James G. Blaine heeded that call and introduced an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That is what we frequently refer to as the Blaine Amendment.
Instead of just saying there'd be no establishment of religion, Blaine suggested it ought to go on to say, and there shall be no federal financial aid, direct or indirectly, to any church or religious school or group or pastor or minister, etc.
It passes overwhelmingly in the House, and it falls like 4 votes short in the Senate of getting the 2/3 majority required.
But Blaine and his cronies achieved through the back door what they couldn't achieve through the front.
Blaine and his allies were able to require many states, as a condition of admission to the Union, to include Blaine language in their constitution.
And so when Montana came into the Union in 1889, it, like many other states of the time, included one of these provisions in their state constitution.
And so every state after 1876 has a Blaine Amendment in its constitution, even though the Blaine Amendment itself fell just short of being sent to the states for ratification. So.
Blaine, Blaine. James G. Blaine, continental lawyer from the state of Maine.
The Blaine Amendment is a result of 1870s era discrimination and then seated in states so that students would not have the opportunity to go to schools that fit them, even if they were better for their education and their lives.
When school choice opponents rely on these provisions to deny educational opportunity to kids, they're relying on relics of 19th century bigotry.
We should have gotten rid of the Blaine amendments years ago. Now's the time to get rid of them.
The notorious Blaine Amendments are found in 37 state constitutions and represent the biggest legal barrier to school choice. Institute for Justice has litigated its way through Blaine Amendment states over the past 30 years to provide school choice options. But a victory in the Espinoza case would be the knockout blow to Blaine blocking school choice. But a decision against Espinoza could nullify what is arguably the largest school choice bill in American history.
When the government provides aid to a parent who makes a choice to use it in a religious school, it's like government providing aid to a veteran a GI who's earned his GI Bill of Rights, and he can go to any school he wants to use the GI Bill, including a religious school.
People don't even realize that after World War II, 2/3 of the GI Bill money was used for high school and technical school education, not for college. I think everybody would be appalled if we suddenly said, you can use it at secular colleges and universities, but no, you can't use it at religious ones.
The government could bar people from using their GI Bill benefits. That is the logical consequence of the other side's argument, that government is free to single out and exclude those types of religious programs. If that's true at the K through 12 level as well as the higher ed level.
Blaine Amendment cases have been settled at the Supreme Court. In 2017, Mike Whitehead was the legal counsel on the biggest Blaine case to go to the highest court in the land. A landmark legal battle that could be a game changer for the Espinoza case.
The last sort of linchpin is actually a case out of Missouri called Trinity Lutheran v. Comer, which was the case of a religious preschool that applied to the state of Missouri for reimbursement for resurfacing its playground.
And the one that stood out most was a rubberized type surface. It seemed to be the most safe and giving.
Well, lo and behold, I found out that the state of Missouri, through the Department of Natural Resources, had a program to offer grants for recycled vehicle tires products. And it was open to supposedly everybody to apply. And she said, well, Mr. Glenn, let me make it clear, we do not discriminate against anybody applying.
So he applied, and a couple weeks later, the same secretary called him. Good news, we had about 44 applications for the grants. We ranked them all on a point system, and you were ranked number 5 out of 44. We have enough material to fund about 14 grants, so you're definitely going to get a grant. A day or so later, he gets a call back, and he's told,
well, unfortunately, you're a church, and therefore you didn't qualify for the grant.
He says, so you're telling me we definitely would have received the grant except for legal department's opinion that because we're a church we don't qualify. She said, that's right.
It made us feel like we were second-class citizens, like the safety of the kids that were playing on our playground didn't matter as much as the kids that were playing on other playgrounds.
That it was a matter of principle because they didn't think it was right for them or for other people of faith in America to be treated as second-class citizens.
We'll hear argument first this morning in Case 15-577, Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer.
After listening to the oral argument, I went to the cloakroom of the Supreme Court and texted my client, but I think there's a chance it could be 7-2 because Justice Breyer stunned everybody when he asked the Solicitor General,
does the Constitution of the United States permit a state or a city to say we give everybody in this city police protection, but not churches? We give everybody fire protection, but let the church burn down.
I'm not going to take the position that it permits those laws.
All right, now you say no, it does not permit those laws. Very well. How does it permit Missouri to deny money to the same place for helping children not fall in the playground, cut their knees, get tetanus, break a leg, etc.? What's the difference?
And what's the difference? The die was cast and the momentum had shifted, and this now had become a principle of equal access to a public benefit, not about strict separation of church and state.
Mike Whitehead's prediction rang true as the Supreme Court rejected the use of Missouri's Blaine Amendment and ruled in favor of Trinity Lutheran 7-2.
Because of this long historical tradition that I think really was rooted in anti-Catholicism. The real fear is that the principle of the Trinity case would be applied to public benefit programs to religious education. And so that was behind Justice Sotomayor's dissent when at the close of her dissenting opinion she said, the principle of separation of church and state has been removed from a principle of First Amendment law to a mere slogan. That's been my goal for all of my career, is to see the courts recognize that the text says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. None of those words are high wall of separation between church and state. The constitutional text protects all people of all faiths and gives all people the right of equal access even to public benefits. When you see those infringements, don't just say, I'll go along to get along, be willing to stand up. We're seeing good results when people are willing to stand. So we urge people, be encouraged. It's worth the fight, and it's a fight we can win.
Today's argument was 30 years in the making.
We'll hear argument this morning in Case 18-1195, Espinoza versus the Montana Department of Revenue.
Being in that courtroom was a very surreal experience, knowing that we were championing a cause for families all across America, kind of taking the torch and carrying that torch for them, which is humbling.
They don't have to fund private education at all, but if they choose to provide scholarships that are available to students who attend private schools, they can't discriminate against parents who want to send their children to schools that are affiliated in some way with a church.
You saw what Justice Kavanaugh, as he asked some very pointed and direct questions, he was getting at the core of this, which is this Blaine Amendment.
If you're running a scholarship fund and there's a group of people lining up for the scholarships, are you secular? Okay, you can get it. Are you Catholic? No, you're out because you're Catholic. Unconstitutional?
We're not defending religious bigotry here, okay? I think no-aid clauses have a principal justification, especially in Montana.
Well, they're certainly rooted in grotesque religious bigotry against Catholics. It's odious to the Constitution, to quote the words of Trinity Lutheran.
You could feel what was going on in that courtroom.
Whether you go to a religious school or you go to a secular private school, you're in the same boat at this point. But there is no discrimination at this point going on, is there?
Yes, there is. You can't let the remedy shield the discriminatory judgment. The discriminatory judgment is in mistakenly believing that this Blaine Amendment and the application of it did not violate the federal Constitution. If they got that question right, we wouldn't be here.
There was a sad and kind of confusing distinction being made by Justices Kagan and Ginsburg and Sotomayor about this being about aid to schools.
Any case that involves Article III standing where the intended beneficiaries of the program
the school's the intended beneficiary.
I respectfully, Your Honor, I disagree.
Much of the argument had proceeded on an incorrect assumption, and that is that school choice programs aid schools. Dick said no.
Mr. Comer, 2 minutes remaining.
Thank you.
My favorite moment of the argument was Dick's closing argument.
What we're saying here is that what Trinity Lutheran says, the state can't discriminate on the basis of religion. The decision is crystal clear when you read it, that is what they are doing in this case. They focus on the religious affiliation or religious nature of the schools. They are not talking about what the schools do. They are talking about what the schools are.
I was so frustrated by the end at the rebuttal point that I was kind of wound up.
Zelman has already answered the question about who this program is aiding. It's not aiding the schools, it is aiding the parents.
What I wanted them to understand was that it is not an establishment of religion to give money to parents and let them choose.
You have a choice to make about the parents here. You can either view them as mere inconsequential conduits through which public funds flow to the religious schools they choose.
Our opponents have always treated the parents, and they once used this phrase, which is why I used it, they treat the parents as inconsequential conduits. They're just pipes through which the aid flows from the state to the religious school. But we know that's not what's happening.
Or you can regard them as you did in Zelman, as free and independent decision makers who are being given the power to choose a religious education or a secular education in private schools.
And if you view them that way, then it's clear that this is not about funding religious schools. This is about funding families, empowering them to make the choices concerning their children's education, and trusting them to do so. I don't see how anyone could object to that.
Trying to get that point across that seemed to be being lost, in the course of the legal arguments, that I thought was critical for them to focus on. There's a million things I could have said, but at that point I had 2 minutes. So that's what I chose to say, and that's my story, and we're sticking to it.
The only thing is we wish we'd had Dick Comer had a mic to drop when he concluded, right?
Why we're here today, some of these kids will never have this opportunity in other venues, and now is the time for us to step up and provide for all of our children. And we want to be a part of making this country great again.
We really felt very good coming out of the argument. There were over 200 students on the courthouse steps, and they were chanting in favor of school choice as we came down to begin the press conference. And it was just such an incredible moment to see.
It was one of those moments that you'll never forget.
As the Supreme Court held during the desegregation era, a government body doesn't get to shut down a program to avoid including a protected class. In that era, the protected class that was being discriminated against was African Americans. Here, the class discriminated against anyone who wants to send their kids to a religious school.
But I think about the opportunities that we've had going to Stillwater and how it's changed for my family and given us a real sense of peace and comfort. As a parent, that's huge for me. We have a right and a responsibility to stand up and fight for what is important to us.
A single parent and a single voice, somebody who's willing to pick up the banner and say, I'm gonna do what's right for my kids. I don't care if I have to take it to DC all the way up to the steps of the Supreme Court, I'm gonna go do it. Take up the courage to step out of just a normal life in Montana or anywhere else and take this thing through to the conclusion of a 200-year legal debate. That is incredibly powerful.
The fact that we had to stand in line from 5 o'clock the night before just to get a seat, to watch an argument that was so important to so many people, but really solidified. This is a huge deal for a lot of people. And then walking down those steps at the end and seeing all those hundreds of people out there, it made me realize that this was a pretty important thing for a lot of families.
Parents need to realize it's not hopeless. You've been told all your life, we're in charge of your kid, you're not. That ends when the Blaine Amendment is found to be the awful, despicable, unconstitutional set of amendments that it is. And knocking that wall down will be one of the biggest steps forward for both education quality and for liberty that this country has seen.
We must reject discrimination and instead replace it with freedom and liberty and protecting these fundamental rights that were granted to us from the Constitution.
We have been litigating this case under the Free Exercise Clause, but it's about so much more than religious freedom. It's about parents' right to choose the best school for their kids, regardless of whether that school is religious or not. Those kids deserve a choice, and we hope the U.S. Supreme Court will give it to them.
Government cannot single out and exclude religious options in financial aid programs across the board.
It will give that kind of inspiration to all the people across the country who've been trying to make this work for their families, legislators who've been trying to get this done for their constituents, and it will really give them a boost to know the highest court in the land agrees with us. And we know it's the right thing to do for families and for our states. That's what I think a favorable ruling will do in this case. Will lift us up.
And so it begins. I don't know, I'm more nervous this morning than I have been. So maybe that's a sign. Oh, we're there. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
A huge decision this morning from the U.S. Supreme Court. In a 5-4 decision, the High Court says that Montana Constitution cannot be used to prevent a state tax credit from helping fund the education of kids attending religious schools.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. And it's a victory for us, but it's a victory for all kids. School choice is so important, and this just validates it.
This is now the new era. Parents now have more choices. Parents aren't limited anymore or shackled by these laws.
And now there's hope. You got to hang on to that hope. And we did, and we came out on top. It's a great day.
The U.S. Supreme Court sides with the Kalispell family in a dispute over tax credits to help fund private school scholarships, including religious schools.
Our rights are recognized by the highest court in the land, that we as parents have that right to direct our kids' education and be included in programs that are available to the general public.
All Americans should understand the importance of empowering parents to make those choices, and no parent should be denied that choice simply because they believe a religious school is the best option for their children.
If you're just thinking in a very small way, that it's pretty easy to lose sight of what's really important. But in Montana, when the way that you think is as big as the big sky of Montana, you come to understand it when you are willing to think that big.
This onerous Blaine Amendment has been relegated to the trash heap of history.
Blaine amendments today on this historic day for religious freedom are done.
Those are now gone. The legal impediment to effective school choice programs are now removed, and it's up to the legislatures now to move forward. This has been the culmination of a legal campaign that started with IJ in 1991. You talk about the wheels of justice grinding slowly. They do. I mean, we were doing school choice when, nobody else was. Now lots of people, want to do school choice because we've proved that you can win.
Policymakers nationwide now have the freedom to enact school choice programs that will empower parents to make important educational decisions for their children.
Choice is just that, it's choice. The hope is that school choice can truly revolutionize education in America today.
I don't think the work here is done, and I don't know that people should be entirely complacent about these Blaine amendments just because of this decision. There's a lot to be said for just not leaving these Blaine amendments on the books as a monument to bigotry. The Blaine amendments still have that potential. If you just wiped out the Blaine amendment, you would essentially wipe out the debate.
I'm a mom, and I'm trying to do what's right for my child. And I want her to succeed because I see her someday as being a future leader. When I adopted her, the notary we met with, he said, "What do you hope for your child?" And I said, "The world's her oyster. Whatever she chooses to go after, I'm going to be behind her 100%. It's a single parent trying to give her child what's best to see her succeed.
Really does change things for a single mom. No longer does she have to look at her child's future and say, well, I'm destined to go this way because I have no other choice. If a parent has a dream in their heart and a desire to have their kids be challenged and excel beyond where they're at because that school maybe isn't benefiting them, there's hope for that. That means that a child's life could potentially be changed. It could potentially change a nation. Where could that child go? I mean, what could the possibilities are limitless. It's an endless possibilities and opportunities for that child who's educated, who's confident, who's driven, who wouldn't maybe have had that opportunity stuck in a public school that isn't working for them. So to think about all these other families that are out there that maybe desperately want to send their kids somewhere other than a failing public school. And if they don't have that opportunity because we didn't stand up and fight, I would feel ashamed. I would feel very responsible for that. Somebody has to stand up and take this torch and keep it going.